The people who you are surrounding yourself with, who see good in you, who can reflect back the light, you need to listen to them. As early as I can remember, the friends on my block and in my neighborhood who I loved spending time with and hanging out with, we couldn't go to the same school. And my father said, the school down the street is not safe. And my very next thought was, well, if it's not safe, what about my friends? That was something I was always concerned about, like why that wasn't being fixed, how that could happen in the first place.
Being a dean of a law school, that is like being the CEO of a company.
You feel more of the responsibility of everybody in a way that feels different. Servant leadership for me means identifying and articulating that vision that best describes who we are as a community, what we can do going forward. I actually think Loyola is the best place to serve the community and do what we need to do. And it's not because as a leader, I think I have an answer. It is because I believe in the community having the answer. And it's through that service that I can help make sure we're headed together in the right direction.
What does it look like to lead a 104-year-old institution? How do you build on a century-old legacy? And more importantly, what kind of person does it take to take up the mantle and responsibility of leadership, cast vision, and mobilize thousands of people toward even greater success? Our guest today is the newly installed Dean of LMU Loyola Law School, which first opened its doors in 1920. Our guest is a pioneer, trailblazer, a leader of men and women. And in addition to her unparalleled intellect and tremendous career, she's one of the warmest and nicest people I have ever met. Today, on Art of Purpose, we have the tremendous honor of having with us Dean Brietta Clark. On this episode, Dean Clark will share with us her incredibly inspiring journey from a little girl in Chicago with humble beginnings but big dreams, to big law attorney, to a nationally recognized expert in health law and bioethics, and finally, to her appointment as the 19th Dean of LMU Loyola Law School just this year. Incidentally, her appointment marked a significant moment in history. Dean Clark is the first woman and first woman of color to lead Loyola Law School. That alone, as if everything else wasn't enough, which it is monumental. Dean Clark, welcome to Art of Purpose, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And wow, I'm not sure who that is who you just described. Yeah. That was amazing and humbling. Thank you.
No, absolutely. And what I love most is that all we can do is talk about what is. And all of that is who you are, right? So thank you so much for giving us of your time. I know you are incredibly busy, and for making this time. For everyone listening to us on YouTube or watching us on YouTube, we are a bit of a travel podcast today. You'll see it's a different venue. We are in Robinson Courtroom at Loyola Law School. So thank you very much to Dean Clark and Loyola Law School for allowing us to be here.
Thank you to you and your team for coming this way the day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, no, well, thanks for fitting us in. And, to all of our listeners, thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you all for your comments. Keep engaging, keep those comments coming. We really appreciate that, and it keeps us going. So thank you all. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So Dean Clark, once again, thank you so much for giving us of your time. Kind of wanted a big thing of what we wanted to do today is just talk about your journey and your story. We often see people and all the accomplishments and where they are in life, and we are devoid sometimes just because there's no time to talk about it, of the story, who this person is, what shaped them, what challenges they overcame. And we love talking about that here on our podcast, and it encourages people, it inspires people, and it helps people see how people find their purpose, right? And so thank you for being here. I want to start with, you growing up in Chicago.
Sure.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what life was like growing up as a little girl in Chicago?
Yeah, so I'm from the south side of Chicago, and, I would say there were many textures to my life. I was incredibly privileged to have parents who were wonderful, supportive, loved me, who I loved tremendously. And we were living in a setting and in a time where things were very challenging and very hard. Many people may not realize this, but Chicago, even today, is still very racially segregated. And so I grew up really living and seeing segregation throughout. So, all at once, I had a father and mother who were raising me to think I could do anything I wanted to do. I remember my dad saying, "You're a Clark. You can do anything you want to do," right? And so that, that was my mantra.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my father in particular, because he was a police officer, and because of his own very humble beginnings as a Black man growing up in an even more racially segregated time in Chicago before the Civil Rights Act, he was born 30 years before that. And so he was very realistic and wanted me to be realistic about what I was seeing and what I was living so that I would know how to move past it and get beyond it. And so, for example, as early as I could remember, the friends on my block and in my neighborhood who I loved spending time with and hanging out with, we couldn't go to the same school. And the first time I realized I wasn't going to get to go to school with them, I asked my parents why not, and they said, "Well, first they didn't want to give too direct an answer." But my father raised me pretty early on to kind of grill like a lawyer. And so
Can I ask how old you were about that time?
I was probably around 5 or 6, when I really started like pushing on where I wanted to go to school, wanting to be with my friends, right, and pushing back on the decisions that were being made. And my father said, the school down the street, it's not safe. It's not safe. It doesn't have the resources that you need. And so my very next thought was, well, if it's not safe, what about my friends? And that he didn't really have an answer for. And, it was in my 5-6-year-old brain, right, and language, but it definitely sparked something in me. My mother worked in a public school in Chicago in a very disadvantaged area. There were times I would go to school with her when I would get out of school and I had to hang out with her. And I saw the difference. I saw the difference between kind of the school that we had to commute to for an hour where I went and what the school would have looked like if my parents didn't do that, figure out how to make that happen. And so that was something I was always concerned about, like why that wasn't being fixed, how that could happen in the first place. So there were things like that. As I got older, my father, who again was a police officer, had the talk with me about interacting with police. And now he had police friends, right? And so there were certainly people he thought I could trust and to look out for me. But he was really honest with me about his experience as a police officer and what his supervisors would tell him to do. And the thing that struck me so much that I remember is he told me when he was first on the police force, he was instructed to police people in this area that was essentially like a lower economic area that bordered another more affluent area. The lower economic area, all Black, the more affluent area, mostly white. The more affluent area, he was supposed to make sure those folks were safe. And if he saw people going into that area that looked like they were from the lower economic area, he was supposed to kind of usher them along, check, make sure they weren't there to cause trouble. The area that was seen as the dangerous area he was supposed to police, that's the area where he grew up. Those are people like him and our family, right? People who still lived there. The area that was seen as the one to protect was where I was going to school, right? So, all through this, I was very aware of that kind of inequality. I was aware of differential policing. I was aware of the fact that supportive resources, protective resources were going to communities that were predominantly white and more affluent, and areas that were not and that were predominantly Black were being deprived of resources, drained of resources, or being treated as kind of suspicious, dangerous areas that needed to be controlled. So, those were just examples of daily experiences I saw. But the one I've shared that was the one that hit me the most deeply was when I was in high school, and my father had his first heart attack. And at the time, so it manifested, 'cause it can manifest different ways. It was manifesting in him having trouble breathing. And so my mother, races us to the car, and she doesn't go to the hospital that's 5 minutes away. And I'm like, what are you doing? Where are you going? It's right there. Why didn't you go there? She's going in the opposite direction. And she passes like a couple hospitals and goes to the one that she trusted. Again, not in the kind of predominantly Black areas that have been deprived of resources, but into this more affluent area with this hospital that was very well known, very well resourced. And they did save my dad's life. And at the time, I still didn't fully appreciate, just to be honest, whether my mom made the right decision, right?
Sure, yeah.
You hear so much about, you just go to the closest place, you call the ambulance, right? But as you mentioned, I ended up studying healthcare law. My focus was on access and quality disparities. And basically, I learned that the hospital that my mom, kind of avoided basically had a reputation similar to one here in South LA that used to be known as Killer King, right? It was known as you won't get better if you go there. It was actually you taking your life into your hands if you went there. So I'm convinced my mother absolutely made the right decision. It was awful that was a decision that she had to make. It was awful living through it.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's so much of your personal story in your life and your feelings, and thank you for telling that and sharing that with us and all our listeners. I think that tells us a lot of your story, in one fell swoop. If I could ask some questions on that. You're a little girl, you're becoming aware of these inequalities, these differences, these inequities. Is law school, is an attorney, is when does that become something to you that you go, hey, that's a tool that I can use to change what I'm seeing, the things that I don't like? Is that something that I know that your father is huge, your parents, and your father, I know you've spoken about him in the past during your installation. You brought me, I was telling my siblings, I was like in tears, right? Because of how you were talking about him and your relationship with him. And when was it that lawyer, or was it your parents, talking to you? How did that begin to form as a thought in your mind?
So the funny thing is, I can't remember the exact moment it formed because my father pretty much brainwashed me.
Okay, there it is.
Like early on. I want to say 3 years old, but who knows? So, I mentioned my dad was a police officer. He also only had a high school education formally, but was incredibly smart. He was not able to go to college because he needed to help his family out and help put his brother through school. But he was incredibly smart. He loved learning. That was a priority for him. And I think as a police officer, the folks he had most access to kind of visually that he saw as being successful and also being able to deal with this were attorneys. So it was my father who planted the idea of me going into law very early on.
Inception.
Oh my God, he was masterful. Like it's
a huge skill.
It is a huge skill, right? He wasn't one of those parents who's like, you are going to be this when you grow up, and it was no. It was he planted these seeds of what was exciting about the law. I mentioned that he was pretty honest about what we were seeing in these disparities. So he encouraged me to talk about them and critique. And he's like, what do you think is wrong with this? Or why do you think this is this way? What would you do to change it? Right. So very early on, he trained me to kind of think critically in a productive way. But again, always, kind of with an eye toward what can you do different.
I love that.
And even when I was critical of things, he would challenge my assumptions and cause me to always think even more deeply and not just stay comfortable in the place where I thought I knew something, but to always challenge myself. And that's something, as you know, right, as a lawyer, you are constantly testing assumptions, right? Testing what's coming at you. You have to push yourself to think about all sides. You know, by definition, you live in this place of discomfort, but and you almost crave it, right? Because anything else would be boring, right? It's that stimulation, right? So that was part of the masterful part. Like my dad planted that in me early on.
This might be an unfair question, but can you think of like a situation or example like that, or whether your dad was doing that? I love this sort of description of like how he did this with you.
So, I mean, so one of the things my dad encouraged me to do was question everything and anything. And again, not to be contrary.
Right.
And never disrespectfully and never with a desire to prove somebody wrong, but to really ask why something existed the way it existed. And so I remember, I'm trying to remember, well, I probably need to be somewhat careful about what I say, but so he would actually be pretty honest with me about things that police did and what he saw and what bothered him. So one was actually challenging the entire structure of policing. Again, not to say completely get rid of it. It doesn't exist. He was a police officer. He helped people. He saw that people helping. But he felt comfortable in the ambiguity. You know, he could see that there were people who wanted to serve as police officers to help. He saw examples of that, and he talked about that and held that up at the same time that he could show what was problematic about what his supervisors were directing him to do, what he would see other police doing. And one of the early things I remember him pointing out, and it was because of something we were doing in high school, and I was starting to learn, it was in health class, and we were starting to learn about safe sex and all these things. And for some reason, even prostitution was coming up. It was like prostitution, drugs. There were a few things in our curriculum. And the assumptions that these things were obviously bad and unsafe. Well, my father would talk about how the justice system treated women who were arrested as prostitutes versus the men who were engaging in the illegal behavior with the prostitutes, being let off and never seen as really morally compromised. So that's just an example of, right, most parents would think, yes, this is just bad, and it's just the lesson of, stay away from this or where this is happening. Whereas my father helped me think about all the people involved in this narrative as true people, authentic, whole people, and to ask the question, like, why are we dismissing them and devaluing them in this way? And why are we allowing this unequal treatment to happen without really questioning it, right? So what was supposed to be just like this little report in high school, right, was my father. And he was like, do you want to, because he was a police officer, he was like, do you want to interview somebody who does this for a living to better understand it, right? He's right, just because this was my father. Like, so, it was, police were not going to be held up as heroes only, right? And you're not going to take somebody who's breaking the law and just treat them and label them as criminals and outcasts only. You are going to look at both of those groups as true people, full people, whole people, and ask, what is the system doing that's contributing to how we see them, how they're being treated, how they're allowed to treat other people, and what that means.
That's amazing. And that you had this, for lack of a better word here, training, right? By your father, your parents growing up that made you think this way, that maybe it's something your father knew and recognized and said, hey, attorneys need to be like this, or he just wanted you to think critically, which ends up helping you in your career, right, in your profession. I think, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I share some of this sort of concept because, growing up, my dad, with us in particular, I point to my dad sitting back there, but is that he always told the truth. And without sugarcoating it, sure, there's a way to say it to a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old that, maybe is different from a 15-year-old. But for example, and I've shared this before, but, even my status as being undocumented, I knew that since I was a little kid. And it was explained to me. Now, the effects of it, I didn't fully comprehend until going to college and you start realizing, oh, wow, this, but I knew that since I was a little kid. So for me, it took the fear as well out of these things, right? Because here's the truth. This is a situation that doesn't limit you. Now, what are you going to do to overcome that? Right.
Yes.
And it helped me growing up and in sort of any sort of situations in life, just being critical and like thinking. But I love what you said, because it's not just critical to critique, but to think about it from all sides. And often, as an attorney, I feel like I'm so trying to get in the head of the opposing counsel, and what are they looking for? What is it that the defendant wants? In my case, right? What is it that they want out of this? How do we come to a resolution? And I feel like that helps, and to some degree, it takes emotion a little off to the side, so that you can try to understand somebody else. Otherwise, it's just a little bit of an echo chamber, where we're just sort of yelling at each other, right? I don't know if that's something similar throughout your career and life.
Absolutely. And something you said also really touched me about your father's wanting to make sure you understood all of your background and who you were, even if the comprehension of the impact of all of that, right, evolves with time, obviously. And it's this idea of visibility, right? And it's making things visible that otherwise society suppresses or tries to render invisible, or that fear causes us to suppress and render invisible, or our inability to hear others keeps us from being able to see, right, or hear. And so it sounds like we both got similar gifts from our dad.
Yeah, it certainly sounds
love
like
that.
it. Yeah.
Told you did a great job.
I love that you said your dad said, you're a Clark. You could do it. So, you're growing up, you have this sort of inception, right, that you planted in you by like, hey, I want to be an attorney. You make your way into law school, into college, then law school. Can you talk to us just a little bit about sort of that experience as a woman of color? Even now, I think it's something that so many people that came up before us opened the doors for us, but everybody's experience was different as they were going through it. Can you share a little bit about that, please?
No, absolutely. And this is the second part of my dad's mastermind. This is his master plan. So yes, he planted the seed of the kind of desire and passion for what it takes to want to be in law. But as I said, he didn't have that formal education and exposure. We didn't have attorneys. He didn't have attorneys in his family. So he used his position as a police officer to basically find attorneys to talk to me and let me shadow them, especially if they were Black. Oh, forget it. If you were a Black attorney in a courtroom, he's like, oh, you're talking to my daughter. So he's grabbing attorneys. Cool. I mean, I still remember, and I can't remember how old I was, maybe 10. It's a guess. I'm not sure. But I feel like it was around 10 or 11. My father got a judge. I don't even know how he knew this judge. He found a Black judge, and he was like, I want my daughter to go to law school. She needs to kind of see. My dad thought I was going to be a judge too. So he was like, he wanted me to see what, what judges did. And sure enough, the next thing I know, I'm in this judge's chambers observing a mediation effectively. Wow, he had both of the attorneys coming in, and he was really frank with them about, oh, yeah, I don't think you have a great case. You need to come with a different offer, and kind of going back and forth. And the attorneys are just like looking at this little girl like, who is she? He's like, don't worry about who she is, right? So it really was. It was being in court, having people who I could see look like me, look like my dad, doing this work. Because of them, he also found out about programs. So my dad was constantly putting me into a mock trial program or something like that as I throughout. So, I just remember doing something legal as early as elementary school. And then I just kept it up. And in college, I was actually able to take courses at the law school at that university. And so I got it from a real law professor who was actually a clerk for Thurgood Marshall.
Oh, wow.
Cool. So that was amazing. That was a pretty amazing experience. And so all of that just fed my love. Like it was all exciting to me. I loved it. It never felt like a chore.
I was going to ask that because, it's at some point, sometimes, even the best wishes of parents, sometimes, children can go, okay, it's a little too much, right? But it certainly sounds like it's something that you also like wanted, and it was a hunger and a thirst for it. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, look, if I'm being honest, if Debbie Allen were to come here right now and tell me, I need you as a dancer in my lead performance, right, for the next 5 years, I'm like, yo, I'm out. This is my dream, right? Like,
well, I joked to that point. I joked that I still want to be a baseball player when I grow up, right?
There's some things, like, if it happens, you're like, okay, we got to do this. But, apart from that, it never felt like a chore. It was absolutely something I felt like I loved doing and it was excited by. The one place where there was a little bit of a, potential tension was, and this was partly my dad's own fault because of his plan. So, his plan was to get me excited about the law by thinking about injustice, right, in particular ways. And the attorneys or judges he's connecting me with were people kind of in court, right, litigation. Well, he wanted me and told me that I should be a rich corporate lawyer. Okay, and it was like those exact words, rich corporate lawyer, as if that's the only kind of corporate lawyer that exists. Right? And I don't think he actually even knew what that was because there were no good TV shows about corporate lawyers, right? Like, and he didn't. So, right.
They didn't have suits on.
Right? They didn't have suits on then, right? So he just knew they were rich, right? He wanted me to be rich and not have to struggle. Sure. So that was the only part that didn't seem to fit with the things that were necessarily exciting to me. I didn't really, and it wasn't until law school that I, really had to start making those decisions. But ironically, I actually kind of inadvertently ended up in a situation that even let me see what was exciting about corporate law before I got to law school. And it was for a few years after college, I decided to work and take a little time because my dad passed away in college. And he was my best friend, and he'd been such a driving force for my journey. So it was hard, and I just felt like I needed a little time, and I wanted to make sure that what I wanted to do, what I was doing was really what I wanted. It wasn't just for my dad. So I just, so I was just working to make money. I wasn't even...
This was after graduating college?
It was after graduating college. I'd always planned to go to law school. I'd even taken the LSAT. So I really was just making some money while giving myself a little breathing room to think, reflect before going to law school. That was the plan.
That's hurting me just thinking about you in that position.
It was really hard that my dad didn't get to see me graduate from the college he actually chose for me. I mean, like early on when I was 3, and then get to go into law school. But it was.
He'd be so proud.
I feel. I mean, because it was so much his dream, I feel him with me every step of the way. But I ended up working in.
We haven't even gotten to Dean, so
I know we haven't. I better hurry up.
I mean that he didn't even envision that.
Oh no, he definitely did not. This would blow his mind. Yeah, this would blow his mind.
So cool.
So I worked in a healthcare company. Again, accident. I didn't know when to do healthcare law. I ended up at a healthcare company. I was just supposed to be doing clinical work, not clinical. Sorry, clerical work. Okay. So I wasn't a clinician. Supposed to be doing administrative work for a healthcare company for the clinicians, supporting them, helping them, and I immediately was thrown into the law there too, because they wanted me to do billing, which in healthcare is highly regulated, and it was getting even more regulated at that time, and so even the thing that didn't seem like it would have anything to do with the law. And in this kind of corporate space, because it was so regulated, I was kind of thrust into this position of basically having to figure out some things that looked problematic that I had to try to fix. And then I also saw other things that were of a corporate nature, somebody losing their business to another person because of a bad contract drafting situation. And these were all small business folks who were trying to innovate and provide healthcare to populations and communities that were primarily Medicaid. and that didn't actually have a lot of access. So I was still seeing the kind of inequity, disparity issues that like resonated with me, but through this corporate business lens. It just wasn't the big mega corporations like you're used to thinking, and it wasn't all about profit. It was very much about the healthcare service and system, and so it just kind of made me smile a little bit. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe I could actually see something interesting on the corporate side of things. And then I went to law school and was able to work at a healthcare firm. And I did public policy work for a healthcare advocacy company for Medicaid consumers. And I just fell in love with
and became the expert in this area. So, without completely just jumping over law school experience, right? Throughout law school, how is it that? Because correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding is that you graduated law school and you began practice, but then fairly quickly you began teaching, right?
Yeah.
Was that something that you started sort of seeing when you were in law school? Like, hey, I think I'd like to teach, or go into academia, or how did that begin?
Yeah.
I think many people, students, or that's something. Even people who are practicing, right? Or it's something of interest to them because maybe it's something of interest to them and they don't know if what's the route to that, or if it's a route that they should take, right? So how did that sort of journey get going for you?
So the funny thing is, that's the other thing that was a part of me since I was very little. And I love the title of this podcast and the focus on purpose. I don't know if it's because my mom was a school teacher and there were some like genetic things happening too. I'm not sure. But I was actually tutoring other students really early on, from like, I would say at least around maybe third grade.
Both. Wait, you were in third grade?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved teaching. I loved helping others. And so there was a parallel track. I loved the law so much. Which my dad had presented through this lens of practicing law. Separately, I just loved teaching. And what was interesting is I had this other piece of me that thought about teaching, but it never occurred to me I could teach at a law school level. So in the same way that my thought about law assumed practice, my thought of teaching and my love of teaching assumed elementary, high school. Right. Like that was just, that was it, right? That I didn't even think of anything else. And so that was just, it was in the background. And I remember when I was at the law firm right after law school, and my best friend in law school. And
by the way, it's just not any law firm. She's glossing over it as if it's like any little law firm. Sidley Austin is a huge law firm, one of the best law firms there is in the country. Incidentally, Professor Craig, also who I love very much, and Professor Kelman, who's one of my best friends, also went there. So it's a great firm. Okay, so she went to work at this amazing firm.
Well, and the people were wonderful. Gary Craig was somebody who was a mentor to me when I went, and he helped recruit me there. And then I repaid the favor by harassing him until I got him to come back to Loyola to teach.
So you said one of your friends?
So one of my friends actually took his own life. It was right after law school. And that has a way of causing you to really think deeply about a lot of things, right? Your choices, what really is fulfilling for you or not. Just how are you spending and using the time that you have here for people you care about, right? And so interestingly, one of the first things I started to think about was, as much as I love the law, for me, the practice wasn't as fun as teaching. And I'd gotten to actually teach law in law school, ironically. So I'd had a little taste of this, but I still didn't really know if that was a path for me. So I just started even thinking about, is there a way to incorporate teaching in my life after all? Because I love that idea of working with folks to help them basically do what my dad helped me do. Think differently. Think in a big way, think creatively, think expansively, like trust your ideas and use those to help the world move forward. So I started kind of really thinking about that instead of just feeling like, oh, I'm on this path, I'm doing this corporate law thing. It was what my dad wanted, just keep right. And I had the opportunity to start tutoring law students at that moment, and who'd been struggling in their first semester to help them second semester. That got me connected with some mentors from my law school who remembered me from school and basically said that I should think about teaching law school. And I think if you know, that was one of the first times, not the only time. It definitely wasn't the first time. It was one of the times that I can remember was very significant in terms of how it changed my life, though. That taught me the importance of sometimes listening to others.
Interesting. Yeah, talk about that.
So I think there's an important lesson, like to avoid peer pressure and not be led astray, right, by people who don't have your best interests, right? Yeah. And we get all that from our parents, right? That's important. Those are important lessons, right? Like, you're gonna jump off a cliff just because somebody else jumped. Of course, right? Okay, those are real lessons. But here's the lesson I would want to share with people. The people who you are surrounding yourself with, who see good in you, who can reflect back the light, can see your gifts when you can't, you need to listen to them, right? Like when you're saying to yourself, "Oh, I don't think I have what it takes," and somebody else is saying to you, "No, my God, wow, you're great at this. I think you could be really good at this." Those are the times where, you know, again, if it is somebody who is the kind of person who seems like they want to be productive, they want to do good, they're seeing something in you that is a gift. If the thing they say they see in you, you're like, "Oh, no, not really," right? But it's the kind of thing that makes you like, "Oh, wow, somebody sees that in me." Yeah. You need to listen to that and try to internalize it. Because I would not be where I am today. I would not have the life I have. I love this community. I love what I do. Yeah. On the hardest days, I love what I do. I wouldn't have any of this if I listened to my inner voice that didn't think I could do it, because I didn't see myself or because I doubted my abilities. I needed to listen to other people who could see more in me than I saw in myself.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I think it's important how you provided the parameters even for that, right? Because there are folks who may not have your best interest in
stay
mind,
away from
right?
those.
Yeah, right.
Or you can have a drink with them once in a while. Just don't spend too much time.
Yeah. and it's those people, like you said, right? That I love the way that you put that, right? That see something in you, right? And then that feeling that it generates in you, and so to dwell on that, right? So, you know, people spoke, for lack of a better word here, life into you with that, right?
Yes.
And you decided to take them up on that, right? And take, you know, you put yourself in that position, and so you start teaching. And one of the things I wanted to ask, because it's going to kind of segue into our conversation here, but can I ask, you're tutoring in third grade, so you are already helping others. We see this heart of service. You know, it's clear that this inequalities is something that's stuck in you, and that's not about you. That's about other people and their experience. And for you, that touched you, and you wanted to do something about it, right? You didn't think it was fair. And so there's this big concern I see, and a big heart, for yours, right? And concern for others. And so it makes sense as well that you want to then use the law as a tool to help others and serve others and teach others. I was thinking about how, you know, you helping others learn and think critically really is setting them on their path, right? And then it's like this exponentially being able to help more and more people by helping young people, you know, develop and sharpen those critical skills. All that, as you're growing up, did you ever see yourself as a leader?
Oh God, no. No. And it's funny because looking back, I can see, oh, I guess that would have been an example of leadership, but never would have occurred to me, because I think society puts forth a very particular vision of leadership,
Ocean.
a type of confidence that's almost seems arrogant, a type of aggressiveness that's very male, stereotypically male.
Sure.
A privilege often that comes with that, right? Almost as if somebody floated in on the privilege that, right, kind of created that space for them. Or almost this superhero idea of somebody pulled themselves up by the bootstraps with no help, as if, and we all know no help is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But that like somehow they're this kind of mythical, I could do it, I could get here, right? And so, though, and it even happened to me in my law firm, actually. I had an attorney, a partner, who thought I did not exude enough of the type of confidence that I should with a client. And his way of exuding confidence was to actually pretend he knew something he did not know. My way of exuding confidence was to be authentic and to be able to, when I say something, I know it's right.
Yeah.
Right? And so if I don't know something, I'm going to tell you I don't know and I will look it up.
Yeah.
And then you know that when you get the answer from me, you can count on it.
Yep.
That's my, right? He felt like that was not confident enough.
Yeah.
In the end, there was a situation that came up where we disagreed on an interpretation of something. And the people we ended up having to present this to valued my input more than his. Right. He was a senior partner. And it's because what he thought was confidence, they saw through it and did not feel that they could count on it. Right? And so I was, I would never have thought of that as an example of leadership. I just thought, oh no, this is just how I do things.
Yeah.
I had a very strong sense of, and my word is everything for me. It gets really everything for me. And so it didn't, I think we think of leadership as kind of this top down thing, a particular kind of strength. And, I know that more recently, this concept of kind of equitable leadership, grassroots leadership, bottom up, however you want to think about community, right? Finding the leaders, asking in the community who's demonstrating leadership in what area, instead of it being like there's a leader. No, there's leadership that different people at different times are demonstrating in a way that could really be valuable to your community, right? Yeah. So it's only now that I kind of look back and start to see what other people were probably seeing in me that I had no idea. I didn't know where they were getting this from. Yeah. But I think it was my ability to kind of say, that doesn't feel right, so I'm not going to do that. This is the approach I'm going to take. And it was never arrogant, right? So it didn't feel, I guess if I had done it in an arrogant way, they'd be like, oh, good, there's confidence. It was like, I don't need to tear you down or make you feel like you're wrong or convince you I'm right. This is what's important to me. This is how I believe this should be done. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's something that I've heard a long time ago and it stuck with me, and is that leadership should be recognized, not appointed. Yeah. Right. And it's, when you can recognize, that means that they're doing the work. They are being leaders. It's about being more than having a title.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And it certainly sounds, and we know this to be true, right? What happened with you as you were appointed, rather, you were recognized as the 19th Dean of LMU Loyola Law School. This year, the installation took place. We were fortunate, Sharon and my brother, so we were fortunate enough to be there and witness that. Speaking of being a dean of a law school, we were speaking before we started recording about how that is like being the CEO of a company, right? You are the leader of this institution, and with it comes many responsibilities, right? Some people can call it burdens, some people, but I love what you said. You're like, even on your worst day, you love this, right?
Yeah.
And so even the worst days, quote unquote, like, hey, this is what I want to be doing, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. I think I think it's just an amazing thing, and what goes along with it, right? So how do you, one, maybe we can start off by talking about, coming into this, was this ever a goal of yours? Did it develop into a goal? I would imagine the answer is not that much, really. And then maybe we'd talk a little bit about how you go into, casting vision, mobilizing, like what's all the stuff that you're learning, all the stuff that you're putting into effect. So first, sort of, when did this become an idea that hey, I want to do this?
Yeah. So this was definitely not something that I ever thought of on my own before the opportunity was presented and people actually came to me again. So it was the other another example where when the opportunity presented itself, I would this may not surprise you. I was working on who the next dean was going to be.
That's what
like I was the behind the scenes. I'm like, okay, who do we need? I'm trying to talk to people.
Everybody's holding up a mirror.
And then all of a sudden people are coming to me. I'm like, oh no. Let's talk about this. And they're like, no. And so that that was the first thing again. And they were people who I really respected tremendously. These are people who were my mentors. You know many of them, but I won't name them. I don't want to out them, but they've been people who are my mentors, people who they were models for me in terms of trying to figure out what kind of a professor I wanted to be, what kind of service I wanted to do in terms of being an institutional citizen, scholarship, what kind of impact I wanted to have. And so, so when they came to me and kept asking me about this, it was back to that lesson of you need to at least don't tune them out, right? Like you don't have to do what they say, but you need to actually at least think about what they were saying, right? So that was a big part of it. The other thing I did, so it just so happened that the other thing was they needed an interim dean.
Yeah.
And so there were some people who, again, I really respected and who made the case that this would be an important service to the school as well, to at least do the interim dean. And at that time,
that's how they got you.
Right. Well, and at that time, I had no
serve.
idea.
Yeah.
I didn't even know if I could apply actually for dean at that time. So I really, I accepted that as a service thing. And the most, for people who were talking to me, I was like, well, maybe I could see how this goes. And if I think this is something that maybe I should look into doing, then I'll go to like dean school and then get whatever credential, right? I didn't even know what the process was. And then one day, right? That was the most I was thinking about.
Logical, makes sense.
It makes sense, right? Of course there should be a dean school, right? And then and the funny thing is I had this opportunity right before I had to officially become interim dean. I'd already been scheduled to do a scholarly residence in Geneva. This is a scholarly residence is an opportunity to stay for a good period of time somewhere apart from the noise of the world. Okay, so this was with an organization that focuses on bioethics and health law and science. And it's designed to bring people together who write and think in this area, to give them space to just focus on that away from the day-to-day and come together from all these different disciplines and bounce ideas out, right? So
sounds like a lot of fun.
It was so fun. And so I couldn't reschedule it. This was big deal. So I had to do it then or else I was going to lose it, right? So the president said, no, that's no problem. Go ahead and still do that. So I was doing this for about a month. It was a month residency in Geneva. And during that time, I took a leadership book, Dean leadership book with me, higher ed. And I made sure I was going to set aside time to reflect on this question about whether I should pursue it or not. And in the book, it talked about different kinds of leadership. This is the first time I'd ever even thought of the notion of leadership and trying to think of it as a formal matter. And one of the categories, and just beware of categories, right? So as usual, categories are really imperfect ways of trying to help communicate something substantive that can overlap with these, right? No, things don't ever exist in silos. But one of the categories was servant leadership. And that was the first time I've ever heard it. I was like, oh, okay, that actually makes sense to me. That was the first time that any conception of leadership was one that I could see myself fitting into. And
I'm smiling so much
Yeah, I was
because
gonna say,
it's
like,
a conversation I had with Sharon when we were coming
Yeah.
over here. I was like, everything about Bree is she's a servant leader.
Oh, God.
Right, there's
So
this servant
funny.
leadership to it, and
We
I
did
love
not
that you're
plan
saying.
this.
Yeah, no, I love that you're saying this because that's why I can't stop smiling right now because I was like, yeah, it is what it. Yeah,
It's so funny. I hadn't, and of course, I'm sure I must have heard of this somewhere because you think of Martin Luther King, but of course, like the big people like who are doing this and talking about service in these ways. But I guess I hadn't thought about it in what feels like a much more kind of institutional way, right? You know, I don't know. I think I just thought of that as a very different thing. But it made so much sense to me that the idea of the only reason this made sense to me was because as an extension of or because of how I want to serve Loyola in order to further serve the community. Because I actually think Loyola is the best place to serve the community and do what we need to do. And it's not because as a leader I think I have an answer. It is because I believe in the community having the answer. And so and it's through that service that I can help make sure we're headed together in the right direction, right? There is still this question though of but you are the leader. So it's clearly you gotta do something different. Like you're not getting this job just to sit around and keep doing what you were doing before, right? So and so then there was actually trying to come to terms with, so what is that, right? The motive and concept made sense to me, but I am still learning kind of what it means to be in leadership in this role as opposed to whatever leadership I did as associate dean and whatever leadership I did as a faculty member, right? And it definitely you feel more of the responsibility of everybody in a way that feels different. You are reminded constantly that like decisions do actually stop with you now too, right? Like you can take in as much information as you want, but then at the end of the day, you will be the one accountable, and it's a lot to It was much easier. In fact, I think you should do this, right? And you just everybody raising their hand and like, I can't believe you did that, right? But no, now you got to bring it all together, right? And there's that, but then there is this also important notion of the vision, and I think the servant leadership for me means articulating, like identifying and articulating that vision that best describes who we are as a community, what we can do going forward. It may not be unanimous, right? I mean, lawyers, of course, it will not be unanimous, right? But it definitely still feels for me that it has to come from the community because it's our community that's doing that work. And I can't impose a vision that is not consistent with or resonates with the community. That won't work. And so it needs to be that organic thing. But in this role, you get to see all the pieces and you understand that it's not enough to have the good idea. All the other pieces have to be in place to move it forward. And articulating that vision is crucial to getting the money to help make that go forward, and creating the support and structure and clarity for the staff who are the ones who execute, right? And finding the ways to show the support to the faculty who are the ones also helping to come up with these ideas. And then God, the students are everything, right? They're the reason we're here. And they're our lifelong family because they're our alumni too. Right. And so understanding their needs, telling them what they need, right? Right. Like, how do we articulate that together? Right. Like, I'm here to understand and hear you, but you've got to trust me as the expert and the person who knows where you're trying to go and what you need to get there. Right. So we had to work together to do that. And then on the other side, as alumni, have I earned your trust so that you're willing to come back and be the partner to help us keep going?
Sign me up. No, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that these are those things, once again, that I can imagine you reading that book out in Geneva, right? And just kind of thinking about these things and then internalizing them and going, hey, you know what? I'm going to do this. And certainly it's a process of learning. It always is. We're always learning. But then, how do you, I'd like to give you a moment here to talk about what is then the vision that you have here for the school and, what you see Loyola here doing in the community. One of the things I will mention that I heard you say that I really loved is just how at Loyola, there's a pursuit for academic excellence and real world impact.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's what we're all about. I've told you this privately, and I'll say it here because I really believe it, that, often it's particularly here in Southern California and Los Angeles, there are Loyola alum everywhere at the highest levels of every firm around. I know people are always looking for Loyola alums, for Loyola graduates to be part of their firms. And, I think Loyola not only has the strength, but a great presence here, particularly in Southern California. And, I think that's some part of what, ultimately comes down to what you're discussing. But if you can talk to us a little bit about the vision. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you said that because, that is, there's a long history of a very elitist approach to formal education broadly, but especially in law schools. And there are certain things that the existing system has done to devalue sometimes certain things that are absolutely critical to what we need to achieve justice, believe it or not, right? It's ironic, but this is sometimes the kind of distortion that can happen. In higher education in particular. What's interesting is more are coming around to it, but we have been leaders in this idea that academic excellence demands consideration and concern for the real world problems that need solving. Academic excellence absolutely requires that students get training that makes sure they can deliver on their promises as soon as they graduate, whether it's their promises to their clients, to the people they work for, that they have skills to actually help people right away. And the part of the academic excellence with impact that where we've also been a leader is in terms of the kind of training we provide right away. We've always integrated the practicing world and the importance of practice into the kind of education we give. It is why employers, not just our alumni, love our graduates and say they want Loyola graduates. It is why we have so many people doing public interest work. It is why so many of our successful litigators are also doing other kinds of service. They're not just going to work day in, day out. They are helping clients, but they still also even have a sense of even going beyond. I need to help other attorneys. I need to help our profession. I need to, kind of figure out how to help clients in the community more broadly, right? And there's so many different ways to do that. There is not one way to do any of these things, right? But the Loyola attorneys graduate with that sense of mission and purpose that goes beyond wanting to be materially successful, professionally successful, which, by the way, is a really important goal and a good goal. As my dad was saying, being rich is very good, right? For lots of reasons, not just for you, it's your family, it's your community, it's all sorts of things. So this is not to disparage that by any stretch, but it's, kind of what I see is our professional success comes with this sense of commitment to need to do more, to want to do more, to find the right way to do that, to serve clients ethically, right? And then the other thing that is so important about our academic excellence with impact is it's certainly impact on the end of kind of who, kind of the education we're giving and the graduates we're producing and what they get to do and how they're making the world better. But it's also the inclusive excellence coming in and access to legal education. And so it's impact in that way. We're impacting kind of what the legal profession looks like. We're shaping the diversity of the communities who are represented in the legal profession. So we're bringing in more views, different views, critical views, right, for thinking about that. We're changing the shape of what success looks like, right, because of that inclusive excellence at the front end, right? And from the very beginning of Loyola, I tell this story because I think it's really powerful that at a time where, many schools, relied on their privilege as a status symbol and prestige. Loyola started as an evening program that was designed for students. Yeah, we started as an evening program. We started as a school for people that did not have the privilege to go to a traditional law school during the day. Those are our origins. Wow. Our origins were kind of the Catholic communities and Jewish communities coming together because they were being excluded. And they were saying, we're not going to do that to others. They wanted that inclusive, right? They wanted groups who were being excluded and discriminated against by other schools and firms to have a place and to have a home. Those are our origins. That's our foundation. And we have only tried to make sure we were getting better. I will never say we were perfect. I won't say we're perfect now. I will absolutely say we still have work to do. And that's part of the vision. The vision is building on our foundation of inclusive excellence and our foundation of academic excellence with impact and making it even stronger, making it better, getting more money for students so that they do not have to struggle and they have better access and support while they're here. Expanding the ability of students to make a real difference while they're students through things like our social justice clinic, which has grown, from, I saw it. I was here before there was a social justice clinic. I'm old. I've been here for over 23 years, okay? Yeah. We didn't always have a social justice clinic. We always focused on practice and valued that. But I still remember when Sam Pillsbury was a retired professor, helped start our Center for Juvenile Law Policy. And I remember when Lori Levinson started our Loyola Project for the Innocent. And I remember Marissa Montez as a little grad who barely out of school, like, oh no, we're starting a clinic. I'm like, you guys are doing what? She's barely out of school with Kathleen Kim. And it's amazing now. And it is setting the standard. That was our new grad who started the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic, which is now expanded to a binational migrant advocacy program that is the first of its kind in a school in the nation, right? She's got people seeking her out because she's a leader, right? I don't even know how many weeks we can go before we hear that somebody else has been freed from prison because of the work of Juvenile Innocence and Fair Sentencing or the Loyola Project for the Innocent. We have over 20 clinics doing work right now. And so those are students doing that work and getting that training. Like if they're doing that while they're here, can you imagine what they're going to do when they graduate?
No, and for our listeners, that's what clinics are, is that it gives students real world experience. They're helping real people with real cases while they're in law school. which, for me, when I was in Loyola, that was huge, being able to work with real clients.
Absolutely.
And to your point of preparing students to hit the ground running.
Yes.
Straight out of law school.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I think that's, I'm not a student, I'm an alum, and so are my siblings Sharon and Brandon, but we're excited. We're so excited to have you at the helm and to follow you along this journey and the vision that you've set, and excited to support. And one thing, as we're closing off our time, I'm being mindful. You were so great about giving us your time. But as we close off a little bit, two final sort of questions. One, just following up on some of the stuff that you said right now, and then last one, just we're gonna ask for some book recommendations from you. Okay.
Oh, okay.
But the first one, you mentioned securing funding. Something that I did not know that was a part of a dean's job. As I mentioned earlier before we started recording, you think of a dean as being the one in charge of law school, and they have a lot of responsibility, sure. But I never thought of that. I never thought of securing funding as being one of them, and it's a big thing. And how has that been for you in terms of going through that process? Is it different skill set as well? So there's, your casting vision, but I imagine there's a little bit of like sales and like that goes into it as well. And maybe the things that it wasn't something that you had been thinking about before, right? But can you talk to us a little bit about that? Maybe somebody wants to be a dean one day, and I think that's a great thing to aspire to if that's something you want to do. And what does it entail, that portion?
So that's another example. Sales is something that I think we all think we know what it is, and some of us probably have like a icky, oh, that's somebody trying to get me get me to give up money, right, or get me to do something I don't want to do, or trick me, right?
The used car
salesman. And so again, what's really funny is not in connection with this, but actually in connection with something I wrote on healthcare, and it was about Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. At the time, my partner was learning more about sales for his business. And he would share, I feel like I got a business degree, psychology degree, a whole bunch of degrees, because he would share with me what he was reading and learning. And I actually used a couple of his books about sales in the piece I was writing about Obamacare and Affordable Care Act, because the way it ultimately passed, it still depended on potentially people deciding to sign up for it. It basically still gave people this out somewhat. And so the reality was there were still a lot of healthy people you had to convince to sign up. And so I actually thought about it not from a government program perspective, but from sales. And I thought about the sales principles and so what should, as the leader of the nation, what's the sales pitch, right? That President Obama should be making to people about why they should buy into this. And the principles were so interesting because they've definitely evolved and gotten much more sophisticated. And there's been much more of a focus on ethics in sales. And this idea of it's not about you trying to force somebody else to do something you want. If you're approaching sales from, oh God, I have this product, I need to move it, right? You're only going to get so far. Or that's when you get that feeling, that icky feeling from people. Right. If you approach it from the perspective of what's important to that person, what do they need? And do I have something that could fit that need? It's a very different conversation. You still, again, you're not going to try to trick them into it, so you may not make a sale, and you'll move on if you feel like they don't. But coming at it from that perspective, you get an authentic understanding of the other person's needs. Then you can give them a realistic perspective of what you have, and you figure out together if there's a fit. And if there's not, you move on. Or maybe they're just not ready yet, and at least you've given them the information, and they don't have the icky feeling, and they're probably going to come back to you because they probably got something from that interaction, right? So they trust you now. So those principles really, so that's where I first started learning about the principles of psychology and ethics that have been helping to shape new forms of training around sales. And so the interesting thing was, this role, the big thing I was worried about was fundraising. I was like, I don't know that I can do that. I don't know.
Who likes asking for money?
Who likes asking for money, right? But what was interesting is during the interim dean period where I was learning what was involved, I found out I still had those kind of principles, interesting, but I actually found out it's even, I'm going to say easier, but I don't want to suggest it's easy to just bring in a bunch of money. That's not what I mean.
Yeah.
But it's not hard to ask because you're only talking to people who are interested and care for the most part. Like by the time somebody's gotten to you, the question is how. How, because the first kinds of conversations, at least the first ones I have with you, is what do you care about? What are you excited about? I figure out if we have a need that matches the person's excitement and passion. And then it becomes a question of how, is this the right time? What are the different ways, right? Things like that. If somebody's just a no, I'm not doing it, okay, you respected it, right? And so in terms of the actual process with people, it has just been such an affirming experience. Now, don't get me wrong. I feel pressure. I feel a lot of pressure about, okay, what are the goals? What do we need to bring in? I want to do, what do I need for scholarships here? What do I need for the clinics there? So there is real pressure, and it is not easy to, like, things don't just materialize. But the process of asking feels much more like an affirming opportunity to brainstorm with people who they want to find their purpose too. They are incredibly successful. From people who may not have a lot of material success yet, but they're feeling good. They've got their job and they're like, I'll give a little bit. I'm like, thank you, right? Like, they're like, oh, it's not that much. I'm like, this is incredible, right? Right. It's a full spectrum of people who just graduated to people who've been out for a long time. And so it's figuring out, with people who are excited about the school and they want to make a difference too, right? So how do we do that together? So it's been really affirming.
That's so awesome. So as we finish off here, book recommendations, right? You mentioned the sales one, if you remember those, but then also the leadership one. Or leadership books or anything that you've come across that, I think leadership is whether it's somebody who believes that, hey, like I want to lead an organization, or someone who goes, that kind of sounds, everything Dean Clark has talked about today sounds a little bit like who I think I am. I'd never considered myself a leader. And now I see she's leading this law school. Maybe I have that potential in me as well. And for them to like begin to prepare for that.
So funny. I mean, there's so many different kinds of things. So first, I think reading for fun is the absolute best thing. And I love different genres, like a whole bunch of different genres. And that the thing that I had lost, especially during this time, was not getting to read for fun as much because I'm just trying to still learn, a huge learning curve. So, but I did something for the first time recently that I had not done in like at least 2 years. It used to be the case that whenever I would fly, I would just go to the bookstore in the airport and I just pick something. And just for fun. It looks, I would try to read to get a little sense, but like, I don't know what it is. It's a surprise. It's like the box of chocolates, And so I just did that, this book called Telephone by Percival Everett. And it was deep and it was powerful and not very long. It was perfect for the airplane. And one of the things I do what I've also done for fun is go to bookstores, or like you go like the NPR book list. They just put out their book list. Everybody's doing that now for Thanksgiving and the holidays. And just like I look at other people's recommendations to see what they like and just pick something for fun. So I recommend just doing something for fun, right? It keeps your mind fresh. My partner is all about self-help books, and I'm constantly like, you need to read something for fun too. And he's like, I don't have time to read something for fun. I have to do this stuff out, right? Read something for fun. In terms of like the self-help stuff, I just love any books on psychology. What's the think slow, something fast? Wait, what is it? Oh, what is it?
Remember that? I think Sharon knows.
Yes. It's all about you. The best way to move faster is to slow down. And it's all about how your brain works. Thinking fast and slow. So it talks about, right? It just talks about the different ways your brain works. I think one of the most important things you can do is understand your brain. Leadership, professional success, personal success, relationship, fulfillment, your own individual kind of happiness, all of it comes down to your mind and how it is working. And we think we have control of our minds. I'm gonna tell you, see, your dad knows. Yeah. We all like this willpower, self-discipline, all these words that make us think we're in control. If you don't understand how your brain works, you are not in control. And even if you understand, you're still only a little bit. Like, you're going to get more control.
Yeah. I just understand how I'm not in control.
Wait, you better understand. Right? And then you can, like, trick yourself, right, around certain things. But I would, so I would say books that are those kinds of books. I would say anything that is really just shows you kind of how your brain works so that you can use more of it in a way that will be productive for you instead of hurting you, right? If you're having trouble seeing yourself as a leader, there's a reason for that. There's something, there are messages we're taking in. There are things we're saying to ourselves. What are we doing to reaffirm that? And what can we do differently? Like, you want leadership, first getting your mind to figure out how it's working and what you can do differently. There's another book I'm doing right now, The Slight Edge. Does that sound right?
Let me see.
And there's like The Big Leap and The Slight Edge.
Okay.
See if those are real titles or if I made those up.
Let's see, Slight Edge.
Yes. The Slight Edge, okay, and then The Big Leap, I think.
So The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. And then The Big Leap, you said?
Yes, and I forget who.
Let me see. The Big Leap by, is it Gay Hendricks?
Yes. Okay, so these help with leadership by helping you get control over time.
Very valuable.
Right? So mind.
That's super cool.
What are we doing in here? What are we doing with time? I was somebody who people are like, of course you're successful, you're doing this. My partner's like, you get up early and work so hard. Like, this is who I was. And then when I came into the dean position, I felt completely overwhelmed. Completely overwhelmed. I was learning new things. I was trying to figure out at this new level what leadership meant, what it looked like. One of the things I needed was before I was just reacting a lot, doing things a lot. And then when I really needed to carve out time to think for a paper, it was easier to do because I didn't have nearly as many responsibilities. Now I'm thrust into a position where stuff's coming at me all the time. And and I have to figure out, how do I carve out time to really do the thinking I need to do as a leader? And we believe time is finite. So in the same way, we think we have more control than we do, but we could actually get more control if we know how our brain works. We all assume time is finite, but we could get so much more out of it with just a tweak of how we approach the day. And I've just experienced this in the last 3 weeks. So I may be on a sleep deprivation high, and you may want to disregard everything I'm saying because I may hit a wall and this may all like crash in like another 2 weeks. So take it for what it is. You may want to check back with me in a couple months. But I just experienced this. So those are a couple of books and like what to do to help really gain control over your day. And that's the other thing. I think that's the other piece that is just so important. Taking control over your day, being intentional every morning about what it is you need to get done, finding a way to kind of keep yourself accountable in that.
I love that.
And then one of the other things I suggest, given the conversation we had earlier, is I would suggest people ask for themselves, like, what are the ways they think other people might say they've exhibited leadership already? Not like what organization have you run, but like in your daily life, when did you do something that somebody said to you, oh, wow, that was great that you did it that way, or oh, I'm going to try what you just did, or they learned from you, or they may have been inspired by you. Like, I would take some time to actually reflect on your life, right? And journal a little bit about do some self-discovery.
Yeah. Well, Dean Clark, I think what a way to for us as we sort of land this plane here. Thank you so much for that. I mean, understanding our mind, right? Understanding our brain, so we can better understand ourselves, taking control of our time, right? To whether it's be more productive, do the things that we want to do, and then to reflect on our own lives and see how and how others perhaps see us in the people that care about us, right? See us, and we've exhibited certain traits or gifts. Thank you so much for your time. Again, I know we said it, but we really are very honored that you would set aside some time to do this podcast with us, to speak with us, to speak with all of our subscribers, all the listeners. I know this is an episode where we learned much more about you, which is amazing, and also in yours, I think. A pattern that is yours. We took a lot also from you, and you helped us. And all our listeners. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing the parts that you shared too.
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, thank you. And to all of our listeners, thank you all for tuning in, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on our YouTube channel. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. We really appreciate all of the thoughts that you give and that you put out. Share if you took something from this episode, which I know that you did. Share this episode with somebody that you care about who can also learn and take from Dean Clark's amazing story and advice and encouragement. So once again, thank you all. We have an amazing and also a great episode lined up for next month. So tune in. Until next time.
Thank you.